welcome to the first pinewood remnant of this trip, and it's actually the most eastern pinewood remnant we have here in Scotland, and I've actually come far enough east that I'm actually back outside of the Cairngorm National Park boundary, and I'll throw up a map to show you where I am exactly. This pinewood remnant is known as Glen Ferrick and the Finlets, which to me sounds like some kind of 70s disco band. And I'll be honest, I don't know anything about this pinewood remnant. I hadn't heard about it before until I started doing a bit of planning for this trip, and of course I found it in my pinewood book. And to be honest, as far as pinewood remnants go, it's fairly small and out of the way. It was a little bit awkward to get to down a few sort of very quiet single track roads. I did wonder if I was going the right direction at one point. And essentially what we've got here is we have a clump of old sort of granny pines at the top of the hill. Down at the bottom of the hill near to where I parked, there's a few more scattered granny pines, and then in between there's a lot of younger kind of self-sown pine trees in between that make up the bulk of the remnant. And it's important to remember that when we talk about Caledonian pinewood remnants, we're not necessarily talking about trees that were here 300 odd years ago and the same trees are still here, even though that's the case in a lot of our pinewood remnants. It's about that continuing presence of woodland, tracing that kind of those genetics back to the trees of the original pinewood. Now here we've obviously got a lot of trees that are quite a bit younger than that, kind of cut off for that ancient sort of woodland classification, but a lot of those trees would have grown from seed from trees that would have been old enough to deserve that classification, if that makes sense. So it's not always just about the age of trees, it's that link, that continuous presence of woodland on this site. You can trace the genetics back here, even in the younger trees, to the sort of older ancient pinewood. And that's what's happened here. If you compare the area that's classified as a pinewood remnant compared to how many old granny pine trees are here, there's very few, and the bulk of that area is made up of kind of younger self-sown trees, which is essentially the next generation. So that's that link back to the ancient pinewood. One of the main problems with these smaller remnants is they become so fragile. It wouldn't take much to completely wipe this remnant out, and you can see actually on the eastern side of the wood here, it looks like there was a fire at some point and it's killed off, I don't know, maybe 50 to 100 old pine trees. Now if that fire, whatever the circumstances were, decided to sweep through the rest of this remnant, which is not very far at all, you're talking less than maybe 500 meters, the whole thing would just be gone like that, and all those genetics are gone. But thankfully it looks like they're trying to manage it in a way to expand this remnant. A lot of the open hill between the two sort of small groups of granny pine have obviously filled in, so the deer numbers are obviously low enough for trees to grow. And even walking up here on one of the old tracks, I could see lots of young pine trees. So hopefully this remnant has some future left. The surrounding woods here on either side, they're managed timber plantations. The majority of the plantations are Scots pine. They've been sort of well managed and thinned. There's birch through them too, so that they're quite nice woodlands, even though they're commercially productive. And further at the top of the hill here, it's like your standard open upland sheep grazing. Across the other side of the river there's another small pinewood remnant of self-sown trees, and above that it's just full-on intensively managed driven grouse moor. Unfortunately, you can really see that marked boundary between wood and moorland, which is completely unnatural, of course. As I mentioned earlier in the video, a lot of the woodlands in this area of Scotland have a long history of hunting and management, and this area is no different. And I'm going to read a little bit out of the book here in terms of history of this area. The ancient pine woods at Glen Ferrick and the Finlets along the water of Fuig, I think that's how you say it, lie in the forest of Birse in Deeside. Having once been a royal forest before being conveyed to the bishops of Aberdeen in the 12th century, the area has seen centuries of exploitation. In the 1820s, 2 water-powered sawmills were built on the Fuig, and there followed considerable felling of the pine trees in Glen Ferrick. Nowadays the woods are being managed for conservation and natural regeneration is abundant. You can see that right across the hill now. You know, the future of this remnant definitely looks more positive than negative at the moment. And that is it for Glen Ferrick and the Finlets. So let's move on to Glen Tanar. Welcome to Glen Tanar, second pinewood of the trip. We are currently doing a 14-kilometre route around the pinewood. We've done about 10 kilometres, but I've just come off the main path down to the river for a coffee, just to let Darach have a swim because it's really warm. It's about 24 degrees, and after such a long, cool, grey summer, I'm actually struggling a little bit. What a place! Obviously I got lucky with the weather, but it is a really, really nice pinewood and area in general. And I'll start off with the positives. First positive is scale. This whole pinewood is about 1,000 hectares. And I was reading in the book earlier that apparently the boundary for the woodland hasn't really changed much at all in over 300 years. So not only does it have scale, but it has that, you know, continuous presence of woodland over a long time. The bigger a woodland, or any habitat in general really, the more resilience it's going to have, and the more it's going to be able to adapt to pests and diseases, changes in climate, or even if there's just, you know, a fire or some kind of natural disturbance, there's literally more to help the woodland recover. That's if the fire hasn't wiped out the whole thing after the event. And the size of the pinewood, like I say, about 1,000 hectares all in, actually makes it the 3rd biggest pinewood in Scotland. Parts of the pinewood are also designated as a national nature reserve. It's got special areas of conservation and special protection areas too, so lots of designations. And that longevity and presence of woodland has meant that a lot of the complex sort of ecological relationships that we would find in this kind of habitat have persisted. We have a lot of sort of pinewood specialists that are missing from a large amount of our pinewoods, to be honest. You know, things like capercaillie, crossbill, twin flower, these sort of things. The second big positive here is the scale of natural regeneration. Now, as with a lot of the woodlands in this area, and as I mentioned earlier in the video, there's a long history of kind of management, periods of exploitation, natural disasters like fire. You know, they all happened here to different extents over the years, but the management that's in place now is obviously working, and you've basically got a mix of very well established kind of old Caledonian pinewood remnants kind of scattered throughout the 3 sort of smaller glens that make up this area. And in between now you've got huge areas that are just bouncing back, and there's kind of young sort of that kind of next generation pinewood coming up to fill in all the gaps. And from a sort of Scottish perspective, once you're actually in the middle of this wood, it does feel quite vast. You can see several hills and they're all covered in pinewood. And you don't often get that feeling in Scotland. You're usually in small blocks of forest surrounded by nothing for miles. Third positive for me is just that there's some very nice old big pine trees, especially sort of in the bottom of the 3 kind of mini glens that make up the area. Some of them are really big, some of the kind of tallest granny pines I've ever seen. With that sort of scale of woodland around you, it really does feel like a nice place to be. And then the negatives, I'm not going to be too negative, and I guess they're more observations than specific criticisms to this pine wood, but there's obviously still large areas of sort of commercial Scots pine plantation. Now in some areas you can see that they're working on that. You can see where they've had a machine in to sort of thin the trees out. They put in racks, we call them, lines through the forest so the machine can access and then sort of pick off trees to thin out the wood, so there's more light and more room for the existing trees to grow. But the side of the glen I walked in, that's quite extensive, so that definitely needs to be broken up and improved. And the other big thing for me, and it really is a problem in pretty much all of the pinewoods I've ever been to, is that essentially what we're ending up with here is a very big pinewood monoculture. You can walk through hectares and hectares and hectares of the pinewood forest here, but you won't find anything else but Scots pine. Species like birch, rowan, aspen, alder, willow, these species are pretty much non-existent from the pinewood. And the main reason for that is the seed source for these species to regenerate is just long gone. We're lucky in that Scots pine can live for quite a long time. On average, these Caledonian pines can live for 300 years or more. And the broadleaf species that I just mentioned are relatively fast growing and live for a relatively short time. So what's happened in a lot of our areas is that 300 years ago, some of these trees would have existed, and it didn't matter whether there was sort of fire, too many deer, too many sheep, all this kind of thing. They just stood there and existed. They could cope with that. And they're basically playing the long game and hoping for a chance to kind of set seed again in the future and start, growing some young trees. The problem with the broadleaf species is that they, like I say, they live for a relatively short time. So you could get, you could get a birch wood, and it only lived to maybe 100, 120 years old. Now, if the situation isn't great for natural regeneration, so say there's too many sheep or too many deer, and that birch is trying to drop seed before it dies, but the seedlings keep getting eaten, and then eventually the adult tree reaches the end of its life and dies, and none of that regeneration has come through. Over time, you're just going to lose that species from the woodland, and that's essentially what's happened here with all those other species. I mean, there's the odd rowan, I've seen a couple of aspen, I've seen the odd birch, but for the size of woodland, there's hardly anything in it at all. And you'll see it all over the place, like I say, in Rothiemurchus, Glenmore, Glen Ferrick, it's the same story. Top of that, when you get a species like birch, their seed is wind dispersed, It's very small, very light. I mean, a birch seed lands on your arm, you're barely going to feel it. And if there's quite a rank, dense ground layer, like in a lot of these pine woods, they're just thick with sort of, you know, very deep heather. Any birch that is here, that seed's going to land on top of the heather and just sit there. It doesn't have that weight to get down to the soil to germinate. And even if it does get lucky and falls to the soil, it's going to struggle to get back up through the heather to reach the light. So bringing that broadleaf component back into these pine woods is very difficult without some kind of, you know, man-made disturbance and planting. And that's an issue because these pine woods are missing a big chunk of their natural diversity. Okay, I think that's all I've got to say about this pine wood. I'm really trying to keep these as brief as possible. I'm going to get packed up here and we're going to finish our hike for the day, and I will see you in the next pine wood. Well, it's definitely not September and it's not even 2024. It is the 2nd of February right now, and I am out in the forest for the day back over in Loch Ness. The end of this video has been a bit of a roller coaster to try and get it finished, so I just thought I would explain what's been going on before we get into the Mar Lodge stuff. So I did go to Mar Lodge Estate on the last day of my trip, but as some of you know already, I wasn't long into the day and I managed to crash my drone quite high up in a big kind of granny pine. Now I was about 100 meters away from the tree when it happened, but I definitely saw the drone go into that tree, and I spent the next couple of hours trying to find it. I used the Find My Drone feature, which is a really loud beep from the drone, and I knew it was in that tree, but I just couldn't see it. I think the branches were just so thick and heavy. So eventually I just had to abandon it, and all the drone footage for the week, and some of which you've seen on the video already, was on that card. And I just had to walk away, and that was really frustrating. I actually contacted the estate after that when I got back home, and they were really helpful. The rangers there went out twice and had a really good look for it, but they just couldn't see it either. So I was starting to give up hope, to be honest. Then fast forward to around Christmas time, I was actually over that way anyway, and I took another walk into Mar Lodge on Christmas Eve actually to go and look for the drone again, and I just thought if I didn't finish it, I'd be able to record a couple of videos and kind of, you know, end the video, because I didn't actually record anything of me talking at the time, so I didn't have anything to use. So I walked in, I went to the tree, I had a good look around just in case it had, you know, been blown down from the tree, because it had been through several storms and some pretty harsh weather, to be honest. I was looking up into the tree, I had my binoculars with me, I was looking and I just couldn't find it, so I just had to admit defeat. I spent the rest of the day in Mar Lodge. I kind of walked in further, and then I recorded a couple of clips basically explaining what happened to wrap up this video. And at the end of the day, I was walking back past the tree on the track, and I just thought I would glance back again just because, and I had, you know, the binoculars up and I was looking, and I realized I was looking right at the drone halfway up the tree. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough light and I didn't have any tools with me to retrieve it. It was too high up, so again I had to walk away. But I borrowed some bamboo canes and some zip ties, and I came back a couple of days later and I was able to just reach the drone and knock it out of the tree. And incredibly, there's no damage to the drone whatsoever, and the SD card had survived, and it meant that I was able to use all the footage that was on it for this video. So on to Mar Lodge, the fourth and final pinewood of the trip and this video, and another amazing area. It was my first time visiting, and I can't really believe it's taken me that long to get over there. I would really encourage you to come and have a visit if you haven't been already, to really see what's going on here. And before I get into too much detail, I'd like to recommend a book called Regeneration by Andrew Painting. And that really does have all the details of the story that's happened in Mar Lodge in the last kind of 20 to 30 years. The estate sits right in the centre of the Cairngorth National Park and is almost 30,000 hectares in size. It's the largest national nature reserve in the UK, and 83% of the estate has EU or UK conservation designations. The Caledonian pinewood on the estate is a priority habitat, obviously makes up part of those designations. It's a huge area. The estate itself is about 8% of the total Cairngorth National Park, and it goes from 300 metres above sea level right up to 1,309 metres, and it has several Munros on the estate as well. Mar Lodge Estate was purchased by the National Trust for Scotland in 1985, and that was made possible by a £4 million legacy that was left to the Trust, and also an £8 million endowment given by the National Lottery Heritage Fund. As part of the legacy, there were 12 management principles that had to be adhered to, and 3 of those have been very influential. The first was that the estate should be managed to conserve natural and cultural heritage. The second was the estate should be opened up to public access. And the third was that it should still be run as a Highland sporting estate whilst not impacting negatively on the other 2 principles. And at the time of acquisition, the National Trust for Scotland signed a 25-year management agreement with Scottish Natural Heritage, now known as Nature Scot, and that was linked into even more funding and key performance indicators. So essentially what has happened on the estate is it's been split into 2 zones that relate to deer management and the principles that I just mentioned. The western zone consists of more hands-on management. The deer numbers are still relatively high, and any woodland present is either plantation or very small native woodland fragments. There's still conservation work going on in this area, but it's mainly using planting and it's behind fences. But the area is primarily used to maintain the sporting interest on the estate, and the population of deer in this area is around 1,650. There's no muir burning on Mar Lodge Estate now for driven grouse shooting, but there is still a small amount of walked up grouse shooting. The eastern zone, which is the area that I visited, is referred to as the regeneration zone, and the management approach there is completely different. The area is roughly 12,500 hectares and contains approximately 800 hectares of pinewood remnant. The objective in this zone is landscape scale restoration using natural processes. There's no sporting activity here at all, and there's a no tolerance approach to deer to encourage natural regeneration. One of the most interesting parts of the story here at Mar Lodge is that the National Trust decided they were going to carry out this landscape scale restoration without any fencing, and that was going to require a significant deer cull to make it happen. Now obviously with the long sporting history of the estate and deer estates in general throughout Scotland, this move was seen as quite radical and controversial. It generated a lot of media attention at the time, a lot of pushback, especially from those sporting interests. The 3 main responses were that it just simply wouldn't work, it would impact local tourism negatively, and it would disrupt neighbouring landowners' sporting objectives. Initially, the deer cull didn't go very well, and some management reviews were carried out on the estate, and this resulted in some tweaks to the overall perimeter fence, and also led to the Trust working more closely with neighbouring states around them. And fast forward to 2009, the National Trust also made the decision to move from trying to maintain small populations of deer within the regeneration zone to a no tolerance policy like I mentioned earlier on. And to put that into some kind of context, the area has gone from around 20 plus deer per square kilometre during the early 1990s to around 1 to 2 deer per square kilometre today. And looking at the estate today, it's clearly having a positive impact, and all the work over the past 30 years is really starting to pay off. The area on the estate that is recorded as naturally regenerating has gone from 155 hectares in 2011 all the way up to almost 2,000 hectares in 2021. And of course today, that area of regeneration will be even higher because it's had another 3 or 4 years. And what has started to happen on the estate is a snowball effect, because as you get more trees, you get more shelter, you get more seed, and things really start to ramp up in terms of progress. And for me, it's not just about the pine that's regenerating in and around the woodland itself, which of course is fantastic, but what's really nice is the pine is regenerating right out onto the open hill. It's regenerating up to quite high elevations too, which is really positive. Another big thing I noticed on the estate is the amount of broadleaf regeneration. Lots of birch, lots of rowan, lots of willow. And as I mentioned earlier, you don't always see that because either the seed source just doesn't exist, or the deer pressure is still too high because these species are much more palatable. I didn't get to see this firsthand on my visit, but we did see some photos at a presentation at the Pinewood conference, and that showed us that the montane habitats, the montane willows, that habitat is slowly starting to bounce back too now that the browsing pressure has been reduced. And what's really, really nice is some of the aspen on the estate is now suckering and spreading too, which is just fantastic. And I guess that just leaves me to wrap up this video. Like I say, I've been planning this trip for a while, and I know there's quite a bit of doom and gloom on this channel when I'm talking about things, and that is the reality of the Scottish landscape at the moment. I'm not going to hide away from that, but I suppose part of this trip was I just wanted to show you something a bit different and something a bit more positive. And to be honest, all 4 Pinewoods that I visited, they're all in some stage of recovery, positive recovery. And as damaged and degraded as a lot of our landscape is, there's still stuff out there. There's still habitats to work with, to build on. We just need to put the right conditions in place and take advantage of what we have left. And I suppose one final point that I'd like to make is, obviously we as humans have had a big influence on a lot of the damage and destruction and influence of these woodlands in the past, but it's also the reason why a lot of these woodlands have survived, and these people, for whatever reason, valued them and they safeguarded them, and we have them to enjoy and to make the most of today. I guess the point I'm making is, we're part of that natural landscape too. People are part of it. We can't just be completely hands off. And whether you like it or not, there's no getting away from the fact that humans are part of this restoration journey. It's within our power to turn things around. I know we can leave things to natural processes, and chances are if you leave it long enough, these things may come back, but we hold the power to get the ball rolling, today, and really make a positive impact like we're seeing at places like Mar Lodge. I think that's finally the end of the video. If you made it this far or you stuck around this long, then I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed the video, but I'll leave it there, and hopefully I will see you on the next one.